Atom Symbol Series. China's Nuclear Secrets. Movie Camera Episode 3. Shadows over the Desert. When the Allies withdrew. In 1960, the atmosphere in Beijing grew more tense than ever. Months earlier, Soviet experts had begun announcing their withdrawal from China, a politically calculated but devastating move. Mao Zedong received the news without a flicker of emotion. He simply stared at the map of Xinjiang, where China's first nuclear base was taking shape, and said quietly, "They've gone. Now it's just us, the desert, and this dream." Out in the Lop Nur Desert, where the first nuclear facility was under construction, Chinese engineers and workers exchanged anxious yet determined glances. They had grown accustomed to Soviet guidance. Every calculation, every procedure, every piece of equipment had once come with detailed instruction. But now, everything was left behind in the sands, no blueprints, no mentors, and no room for error. In the first days after the Soviets' departure, scientists Qian Sancheng, Deng Jiaoshen, and their young team faced a harsh reality. They had to calculate every reaction cycle themselves, process nuclear materials on their own, and operate experimental reactors without external help. Each step carried immense risk. One minor miscalculation, one slip in refining uranium or plutonium, could destroy the entire program. The desert was no longer a testing ground. It had become a psychological and technical battlefield, a place where China had to fight not only nature, but the limits of its own knowledge. Without Soviet specialists, the workload became crushing. Chinese engineers had to redesign reactors from scratch, develop their own uranium enrichment systems, and simulate critical experiments. Repeated testing failures pushed the team to the brink of exhaustion. One night, Deng Jiaoshen stood before the chalkboard, staring at the columns of figures, and whispered, "We have to find a way. If we don't, this desert will swallow every hope we have." Out in the desert, workers dug tunnels and hauled materials under brutal conditions. Sandstorms, scorching heat, and a lack of water were enemies as deadly as any weapon. Rough uranium ore, once brought back to the laboratory, had to be refined with extreme caution. A single mistake could cause a lethal radiation accident, yet the work never stopped. Everyone knew, every day lost meant China fell another step behind in history. Beijing grew more tense than ever. Mao held constant meetings with generals and scientists, pressing them forward. "No one will help us. We do it ourselves. Whether this power belongs to China or not, it depends entirely on us." Under the dim blue glow of a mock reactor, Qian Sancheng's team learned to solve problems once thought impossible. They calculated reaction cycles, simulated plutonium refinement, and tested every step as if it were a matter of life and death. Without the Soviets, without support, every result had to be achieved through their own strength. That crushing pressure forged a generation of Chinese scientists, resilient, ingenious, and relentless. In the desert, uranium survey teams worked in silence, bringing back soil and rock samples, each piece like a drop of hope for China's dream of building its own bomb. Every person knew that the survival of the nuclear program, and the future power of the nation, rested on their shoulders. At sunset, the last rays of light glimmered off the laboratory buildings, creating a sight both beautiful and haunting, a symbol of absolute self-reliance amid crisis. This was the turning point. China had entered an age of self-sufficiency, cold, determined, and ready to face any risk in pursuit of history. At Lop Nur, winds cut through the desert like knives. By day, temperatures soared above 50 degrees Celsius. By night, they plunged to nearly -20 degrees Celsius. In those conditions, thousands of engineers, scientists, and soldiers lived in makeshift tents, oil lamps flickering against their hollow faces. They battled not only the weather, but also total isolation, no communication, no modern equipment, no reliable supply lines. Laboratories rose amid sandstorms. Underground vaults for radioactive materials were dug by hand. Each day, the technicians checked every radiation meter, every pipeline, every batch of uranium, because one small mistake could turn the entire site into a dead zone. Yet, no one complained. In Beijing, the government accelerated the program known as 2 bombs, 1 satellite. The objective was clear. China must have the atomic bomb, at any cost. As soon as possible. Pressure weighed heavily on every research group, from veterans like Qian Sancheng and Deng Jiaxuan to the youngest university graduates. Everyone understood. Each result they sent to the Central Command could alter the fate of the nation. During nighttime meetings in the desert, under the faint glow of oil lamps, Qian Sancheng would often speak softly, as if reminding himself, "We have nothing but faith, faith that China can do this. We don't need the Soviets. We don't need anyone." When he finished, silence filled the room, only the wind howled against the canvas tents. Outside, the sand kept blowing, but in their eyes, something burned brighter than the lamps, a fire of self-reliance, of belief, of existence carved from emptiness. When the Soviets left, they took almost everything: detailed blueprints of the reactor, uranium enrichment systems, and precision radiation instruments. All that remained in China were vague outlines and scattered notes. The Chinese scientists had to start from scratch, building tools with their own hands to replace Soviet technology. Minor technical problems became deadly obstacles. No accurate neutron detectors. No centrifuges for uranium enrichment. No software to simulate chain reactions. They were forced to invent in what felt like the prehistoric age. One young engineer later recalled, "We used wartime chemistry formulas, drew graphs by hand, and calculated with abacuses. One wrong number, and everything would explode." In Beijing, officials knew the risks, but the order was clear. Continue. Do not stop. Every failed test was a brush with death. Once, during a uranium refinement experiment, the reactor chamber's pressure spiked beyond its limit, and the cooling system failed to activate. By sheer luck, one engineer noticed it in time and shut the valve manually, saving the entire facility from an explosion. His hands were badly burned, but the next day, he returned to work. When asked why, he simply said, "If I don't do it, who will?" That sentence spread through the base like a quiet oath. They all knew they were gambling their lives to build a national symbol, a weapon meant to protect hundreds of millions. Life in the desert was not only harsh, it was utterly isolated. No one was allowed to speak about their work. No letters, no phone calls, only secret diary entries, many of which were later erased by wind and sand. They lived like ghosts in a classified project, dedicating entire lives to a dream that could never be spoken aloud. Food was scarce. Water was rationed by the drop. Some days, the entire camp had nothing but thin porridge and salt. Yet strangely, no one gave up. At night, as the desert winds howled, they gathered around small oil stoves, singing revolutionary songs and speaking of the future, a future many knew they might never live to see. One young engineer wrote in his diary, "I don't know if we'll succeed. But if one day the world sees China differently, maybe, in some small way, it will be because of what we're doing now." These were not heroes in the traditional sense, but ordinary people with extraordinary resolve. Amid sand, steel, and radiation, they forged a legend, the embodiment of Mao's call for self-reliance. By late 1962, though the crisis had not passed, China had begun to master the basic processes of uranium and plutonium production. The first reactor, crude but stable, was finally operational. From the ruins of the Soviet departure, China began to rise again, rebuilding its nuclear technology with a cold but burning belief. Even without the Soviets, we will build the bomb. Spring, 1963. The Lop Nur Desert lay silent under a blanket of sand, but beneath it stretched a maze of tunnels and secret reactors, where thousands of engineers, scientists, and soldiers toiled in the dark. 3 years after the Soviets' withdrawal, China had not collapsed. On the contrary, it had found its own rhythm. In the control room of the first reactor, the blue light reflected off Qian Sancheng's face, the man known as the father of China's atomic program. He watched the numbers flicker on the console and nodded slightly. "We did it. The reactor is stable. We no longer need the Soviets." The words rippled through the facility like an electric current. There were no cheers, no applause, only silent, burning eyes. They knew this was not victory, but proof that China had survived the darkness of the desert. In Beijing, Mao Zedong received the report. He read it quietly, then wrote a single line in the margin. Good, self-reliance is the only path. From that moment, the 2 bombs, 1 satellite project was accelerated. There was no room left for trial and error, only a race against time and fate. 1964. At Lop Nur, the air was thick with tension. Teams of engineers, researchers, and soldiers worked in perfect coordination, every second counting. Deep underground, 20 meters below the desert surface, China's first atomic bomb, codenamed 596, was nearing completion. No Soviet experts, no foreign guidance. Everything, from the enriched uranium core to the neutron reflector, was the product of a decade of struggle, learning, and sacrifice. October 16, 1964. Cold winds cut across the desert. In a remote control bunker, officers and scientists sat in silence. A voice echoed through the loudspeaker. Countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. No one breathed. When the number 1 rang out, a blinding white flash tore open the sky over Lop Nur. The ground trembled. A column of dust rose kilometers high, the heavens painted in burning orange. And in that instant, China became the 5th nation on Earth to possess the atomic bomb. In the control room, Qian Sancheng stood in silence. A young engineer, his voice trembling, asked, "Have we really succeeded?" Qian did not answer immediately. He simply said, softly, "This is not victory. This is a declaration that China will never again be subdued." The news spread across the globe. The world was shaken. The United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France, the 4 established nuclear powers, were forced to acknowledge it. China had entered the new board of global power. But for those at Lop Nur, it was more than a political triumph. It was the culmination of tens of thousands of lives, hundreds of thousands of days and nights in the desert, and an unbreakable faith that never wavered. After the test, Lop Nur fell silent again. Those who had worked on the top-secret project were forbidden to reveal their identities. Many never returned home. They remained buried beneath the sands, where the desert wind still whispers like the sigh of history. In Beijing, Mao Zedong spoke only one brief sentence before the Politburo. "We have the bomb. But remember, this power is not to destroy. It is to ensure we can never be destroyed." That single statement became the guiding principle of China's nuclear strategy for decades to come. It was not merely a weapon of deterrence, but a symbol of national rebirth. Proof that after a century of humiliation, China had risen from its own ashes. At Lop Nur, rows of abandoned buildings were slowly swallowed by the sand. Yet in the memories of those who once lived there, the images remained vivid. The blue flame of the reactor, the echoing countdown in the underground bunker, the blinding flash that lit up the night sky. It was more than history, it was a testament to the unmatched spirit of self-reliance. And if someone were to ask, what kept China standing through its darkest hours? The answer would not be found in equations or blueprints, but in the hearts of the people in the desert. Those who built a nuclear dream from faith, sacrifice, and silence.